You literally have 2 to 3 pivots before you run out of money or momentum.
If you have your why figured out, you have a lot of things in line.
Hello, welcome to Updesh. So, this is a series that we are doing, which is about the startup owners, and it is about the NRIs who are building such startups in different lands. Throughout this series, we have been talking to NRI founders, startup founders, who've chosen to build product focused teams in India. And they share their honest insights about the challenges, wins, and lessons they've learned along the way, perfect for anyone starting a startup journey of their own. Today, with us, we have a guest. Her name is Radhika. Radhika Dutt is an accomplished entrepreneur, product leader, and the author of Radical Product Thinking, the new mindset for innovative smarter. Radhika's book is already translated into multiple languages like Chinese and Japanese, which explores approaches to building products that drive fundamental change. um, Hello, Radhika. I would like you to introduce yourself a bit for our listeners, and then we can take up today's conversation about building teams through startup.
Well, first of all, thank you for having me here, and I'm excited to be here. So, about me, I lived in India till I was 12, and then we moved to South Africa. And then from South Africa, when I was 17, I moved here to the US for under. So, I did my undergrad and grad at MIT and started my first startup right out of our dorm room setting. And from there, kind of started my whole startup journey. So I've founded multiple startups and I've been part of 5 acquisitions so far, 2 of which were startups that I founded. One was a company I advised, and the others were products that I had built at companies, and we were acquired for the product that I. So, yeah, it's been an exciting journey so far. And just what led me to radical product thinking and kind of how I got here was along the way as I was building these startups or products, I kept noticing that, there are a set of common product diseases that we run into. And when I was building my own startups, I'd made so many mistakes. And I started calling them product diseases at some point. And, as you grow in your career, as you build experience, you realize that you've built an intuition for building good products, successful products. But then, later in your career, you're watching other people make those same mistakes that you used to make. And so radical product thinking was born out of this burning question, is it that we're all doomed to learning how to build successful products by making lots of mistakes that we have to only learn through hard lessons and trial and error? Or is there a step-by-step process that we can give people so that anyone can build world-changing products? And that was the hypothesis behind radical product thinking. I launched it first as a free framework that people could just download from the website. It's even today is. You can get it from radicalproduct.com. But then, it just took off on its own organically. And then people started asking me, do you have a book or a voiceover that tells us if we're using this right? And so that's how the Radical Product Thinking book was born. And it came out in 2020.
That's so wonderful to hear. So, since you said that you've built 2 companies on your own, 2 startups on your own, and you've been part of multiple acquisitions. So, from your lens, what are the primary challenges of building a product-based startup?
One of the things I realized is we're all building a product. So the way I look at it, it's almost like every startup is a product-based startup. Like even if you're building a services company, or even if you're a single, sole proprietorship with a freelance organization, you have a product, right? So first of all, we're all product startups. And the reason I say that is because your product is your mechanism to create change. So whatever your offering is, you're creating that because you think there's a change that's needed. There's something out there that is missing, and there's a problem that's unsolved. And that's why you're creating your offering. So we're all building products. And so the biggest challenge that I see for any product startup, which means any startup at all, is how do you make sure that what you're building is actually what your market needs? I think that's sort of the crux of all of it, that we're and that sort of feels like the nirvana for what we're trying to get to. And I think the challenge in reaching this nirvana usually is that, we have to be able to find that product market fit within the constraints of the amount of funding you have, whether you're bootstrapped or you have lots of VC funding. My own experience has been you literally have 2 to 3 pivots before you run out of money or momentum. And so the big challenge is, how do you find product market fit within this constraint of having 2 to 3 pivots, and you have to figure it out within.
Because you only are allowed number of mistakes. It's not endless, and you cannot go on and on and on about it. There is a end mark to it. You always are
Exactly.
granted 3 wishes, like you said. There are 3 pivots. You're only granted 3 wishes. So
And
that's
why do
very
I say that, right? Like, I think because it's quite contrary to what you hear coming out of Silicon Valley. People will go like, oh, just iterate and keep iterating and pivoting until you find product market fit. But that's not reality. Because what happens is, one, if you don't have that much funding, every single pivot takes up money and time, right? And so within 2 to 3 pivots, if you don't have anything to show for it, it becomes harder to raise the next round of funding. That's one thing. The second thing is, even if you have money, it doesn't matter. Like, you might have a whole war chest. Even if you have this treasure chest, the problem is, like, after 2 to 3 pivots, you start to lose momentum with your team. If you keep doing this whiplash, like today you're trying this, tomorrow you try something else, your team eventually goes like, okay, you have no idea what you're doing. And they lose enthusiasm and the motivation. And it feels like, yeah, now here we are trying this other new thing. So that's why we run out of money and momentum within 2 to 3 pivots.
true. Very true. Very true. I see. When you say something like that, your team loses the momentum. It makes so much sense, because when you're building your team as well, you've briefed them, or you've told them, or you've hired them with the intent that I have this roadmap for you, or this is where I want to reach. And if you pivot, your entire roadmap changes, because it is bound to change course. It cannot be the same thing. And so your eureka moment becomes channelizing the entire thing in a different direction, figuring it out all over again. And it's a lot of work. It's completely a lot of work to bring that framework up to speed and bring that same momentum back. It's very difficult to do that way. And so that's why I would like you to talk about how crucial is hiring when you're doing this entire process of scaling your startup, or when you're building your entire product. How important is hiring in all of this?
I think, and honestly, even with hiring, it's almost like you have to be super careful in that you have to think of each person you're hiring almost like a silver bullet, that you can't waste these, right? Because you have limited amount of funding. But honestly, even if you have enough funding, if you bring in the wrong people, it affects the rest of the team a lot. And so if everyone isn't performing at the same level, if you end up bringing wrong hires, it instantly affects other people, feeling like, there are some people who are not pulling their weight. And so hiring is really important. And, one thing I've learned is, if you make a mistake, you kind of have to correct that mistake really quickly. Like, there used to be a time when I first started out where I used to think, well, let's just give it time and see how it works out. But in reality, what I found is if you make a mistake, just you have to correct for it right away. But it really highlights the importance of hiring someone who's really good, like being really sure that this person is going to work out. Because even the process of deciding, okay, this candidate just isn't working out, and then letting them go, it has so many effects. Like, one, the stress on you, but two, also, it alters the chemistry of the team when you're putting people in and out of the team.
Because higher attrition rates or people leaving is a sign either your entire system is not working, or you are, because in a startup everybody is an individual contributor. So when you take out one of those elements, you make your entire thing a little wobbly as well. Is
Yeah,
that
you make it wobbly basically because, for a team to deliver well, they have to gel as a team. You kind of have to work together to know, how you build a trust as you're working together. You understand each other's styles of working. We all build this bond and feeling like, we're in this together, right? And all of that sort of this process of gelling as a team, building those personal bonds, it takes time. And then if you take somebody out of that because you decide that they're just not the right candidate, it has affected both the building of bonds, but also like created instability in that whole team. And it's a lot of, just cognitive load for people, because you're not just building a product, but also you're working as a team. So you're just adding unnecessary cognitive load by like adding instability to the team if you make the wrong.
so? When you are looking for the first few members, like the core members or the founding engineer or the founding architect, so what are the core qualities that one should look for when they're building their core team or the first few members?
Yeah. So the biggest thing for me has been two factors. One is passion, and the second is resourcefulness, that they'll go figure it out. And, actually, and there's a third one, which is that they have to be secure in themselves, like confident. So I'll share all of these and kind of why I'm saying these three things. Passion, I think, is the most obvious one out of all. I think when someone you're working with is really passionate, they give you energy during your low times. And similarly, you give them energy. You're kind of charging each other's battery because you both, or you're all feeling this same sense of, we want to go solve this problem, right? So that's the most obvious. The next one I was saying, this resourcefulness, because as a startup, you don't have that much time to be able to mentor people. And, if they're stuck somewhere, you also are trying to run in five different directions. So trying to help them figure out kind of how to get unstuck. You really want someone who's going to figure this out, who is constantly curious and trying to figure out like how they're going to make it work, not who's absolutely sharing problems, but also equally driven about finding their own solutions to it and staying aligned. And then the third thing, and it relates to solving problems, when someone is secure and confident in themselves, I don't mean arrogance. I mean instead this quiet confidence that if I have confidence, then, if you're able to challenge me, like, okay, why are you taking this as the solution? Like, why this? Have you considered this other thing? I don't feel like you're questioning me. It feels more like, we're having a healthy debate. Like, and I'll tell you, like, why did I choose this as opposed to this, right? But if I don't have that confidence, if I'm not a secure person, what often I've seen is, if you ask those same questions, why are you taking this approach as opposed to this? The lens that someone has is, oh, you're questioning me. Oh, but why are you questioning me? You should trust me. And like, this is the right answer. But it's not about trust. Maybe by talking about it, we're both going to arrive at a better answer. So being able to ask these questions is okay. Like, we should be able to healthily challenge each other.
It's very true, because I completely agree to this, that when you have very limited knowledge, you do not like being questions because you lack the clarity of it. And hence you do not have the answers, and that irritates you more. The moment you have the answers, you're assured about it, and you are open to the idea of figuring better ways of doing it, you are on a level, and then you are at a point where you are open to discussions. Else, it is a very closed kind of a thing.
Yes, true. But like in a startup, you usually don't have the answers anyway. Like everyone is trying to figure it out. You might have information based on your background. Like let's say, you're the CTO. You might have built, other companies and you might know how to build software using certain things that you've done in the past. And typically anything that you're doing, if it's a new thing, there'll be new things to figure out. Like, in whatever you did in your past company, you might have had some stuff you have used that is legacy, and things have moved on from there, right? And so you might be trying to use something that you're familiar with. And maybe there are new libraries, new, better things too that you can use today. It's not that we can ever say, I know this, right? Like it's okay. You might know some things, but there's always new stuff. And the new stuff is what we're all figuring out. Like it's okay to all question each other and say, this is what I'm doing. This is why I think I'm doing it. I'm open to other things if other people have ideas. I think that's the key. Like always having that, knowing what you know and being open to the possibility that you don't know what you don't know.
True, true, true. But in a startup, the other part is also very important, that when you're opening the floor for people to give their opinions, if no opinion is coming out, then also there is a blockage of some kind. Then you're not growing. It's a one way street, that I'm feeding this information into you, and you are just being diligent workers and not giving back new ideas to me. So that can be a little difficult in a startup situation.
That's such an important point. I think that relates to culture, right? And how do you build a culture where everyone feels like they can contribute that voice? What you said exactly, like you don't want people to feel like, they're just the worker bee, they're just working on the tactical thing, and you're just telling them to execute, do what I tell you, as opposed to contributing their voice and adding their questions to the mix. I think that was one of the key lessons very early on for me in my career. When I describe the kind of person that you want in a startup, someone who is passionate, resourceful, is secure, like, this kind of a person, if you just tell them, I only want you to work on this execution, just listen to what I have to say. I mean, you can't be a passionate person and take this approach. Like passionate person will want to have more of a contribution. They have questions, they're curious, they're thinking. You want to give them a forum. And these are smart people. So you want to hear what they say. I think there's the just misconception in not just the startup world, but the corporate world very often, that as a manager, that it's this one-way street. Like people often think that these leaders like Elon Musk and Steve Jobs got to where they got to by being micromanagers, and Elon Musk even famously calls himself a nano manager. But it isn't that these people succeeded because of these techniques. If they succeeded, it was despite these techniques. And now we see with X, for example, that these techniques don't work, that you really have to listen to people who might know what they're talking about. You want to get opinions from the teams. And there was also a great article on New York Times that talks about Steve Jobs, that when he was a jerk and he was doing this one-way thing of telling people what to do, he failed. And it was when he got insights also and learned to collaborate with other leaders, find the yin and yang of his strengths versus others, and learn to collaborate with people like Tim Cook. That's when he was successful. And I think in a startup, these are the ideas that we have to apply, that, in how do you build the psychological safety in a team so that you're listening to others and getting these passionate, resourceful, and secure people to contribute, ask questions, and give them give their ideas to you.
True, true, true. Being open to a lot of things is something which is very important, I believe. That once you're open to things, you're inviting new things, you are inviting new ideas, you're open to other people's opinions, no matter how radically different they are. The moment they are not aligned to what you think is right, or where you think you're heading is right, it can be a little, there is a lot of confrontational energy there. You have to overcome that.
Yeah, that's such an interesting point, right? Because what you just said about the alignment part, and how do you, and yes, there can be this confrontational energy, but that's not necessarily good. Like, how can you transform confrontational energy into collaborative energy and alignment? And a lot of this is what I talk about also in radical product thinking. Like, how do you make product decision making less contentious and more productive? As a startup founder, like, to be able to create this culture where you're really bringing everyone with you on the journey and getting them to collab, to put in their ideas, right? But you still want alignment. It's not like a free for all. I'm not trying to say that it's a democracy. So, in terms of alignment, like, one of the key things is having clarity of vision and strategy. And one of the misconceptions that we have tells us that having clarity of vision means that, we have this big, broad vision, a vision that says, something like to be the leader in data storage, or, to be $1 billion company and add shareholder value by doing blah, blah, and blah. Boeing's vision, that's something like aspiring to be the enduring leader in aerospace or something like that. Chat goes like, we want to contribute to human progress by empowering people to express themselves. Honestly, all of these are just bullshit visions. I say that because these are vision statements that sound great, but if you hold up a feature against this, it doesn't tell you, should I do this or not? Like, let's look at Snapchat's vision. This vision of, empowering people to express themselves and thereby creating human progress, right? I mean, this could describe my kid's piano teacher who is empowering them to express themselves and thereby contributing to human progress. It could be the vision statement of a fashion brand, of a makeup brand, like anything goes, right? And so when you have a vision statement like this, it's useless. And so in the radical product thinking way, we write a fill in the blank statement that is long, but it is detailed, and it gives you clarity on what's the problem you're trying to solve, who are you solving this problem for, why does it need to be solved, because maybe it doesn't, and then finally, what does the world look like when you're done, and how is your product going to bring it about? Like, that's finally when you have to talk about your product. And so one example of creating alignment using such a vision statement, I'll give you the vision statement of a startup I had, and I founded it in 2011 and sold it in 2014. So, and this is the fill in the blank statement. So today, when amateur wine drinkers want to find wines that they're likely to like and learn about wines along the way, they have to find attractive looking wine labels or find wines that are on sale. We envision a world, this is unacceptable. This is the why part. This is unacceptable because this leads to so many disappointments, and it's hard to learn about wine attractive look. We envision a world where finding wines you like is as easy as finding movies you like on Netflix. We're bringing about this world through a recommendations algorithm that matches wines to your taste and an operational setup that delivers these wines to your door. And now the power of this vision statement is, I hadn't told you anything about this startup, and yet you knew exactly what we were doing and why we were doing it. And the rest of the radical product thinking framework helps you translate this vision into everyday actions very systematically.
True, true. That's very interesting because if you have your why figured out, you have a lot of things in line, and you know how, and then you know when to do it. So that's a very, very nice way of moving ahead with it. Since you were talking about Apple and Elon Musk, and so right now we are seeing a trend of a lot of offshoring that is happening from India. A lot of big labels like Tesla, Apple, Microsoft, they're moving to India for hiring talents in India. What was your experience like in the past when you worked with Indian talents or you've hired Indian talents? What was your experience like?
In terms of culture, what I'll say was the biggest learning from this experience is how important it is to get the whole team to gel together. That, it's not like touring is like, you guys versus us or something like that, that it feels like it's all together. And everyone in the team has to have the same level of understanding of what is it that the customer wants. That, everything that I described in terms of vision, strategy, that it's not like you're telling the offshore team that, guys, you just execute, like, this is the story for you to work on. I'm giving you all these detailed area, you just work on this. It's really not like that. Like, when we were doing user research, I wanted them to also just observe some of these user interviews so that they also got a deep sense of exactly what the user is trying to do, what is the user's intent, so that you have this sense, this intuition as a developer. And that's what made offshoring work so well for us in India. Despite the time difference, despite just one might say that it's so hard to communicate because everyone is remote, you rarely get to see the team, it's not, all in person. It didn't matter. Like, you can make this work really, really well if you can create good alignment and have this culture where you really have gelled as a team.
True, true, true. I think culture is something which is very important while you're working with a globally distributed team, because all your team members on different time zones. But when you build a proper culture around it, it helps you integrate them little well, and it makes your work a little bit easier. So when you had such a distributed team, did you face any challenges in building a cohesive company culture? Um, so if a morale comes down, what do you do specifically to boost it during those times?
I think the boosting morale was never something that we did just artificially. It has to be authentic. And what do I mean by that? Very often the boosting of morale, people see it as, oh, you organize this bowling trip or this forced social activities, right? So I often find that there are more authentic things that you, and yes, those things are important. I'm not dismissing it altogether. Like, yes, it is important to have, team cohesion, and face-to-face time is helpful. So we would do that on a regular basis, like just have the team visiting just our headquarters so that we could all be in the same room, like do a design sprint together or something like that. So that was part of it. But it was less of this artificial morale boost. I think the biggest thing that boosted morale was when you're going through these hard times, like, let's say management feels like there's this project that was started and we need to shut that project down. Or let's say, funding is hard. I've been in this situation where, as a founder, I'm trying to raise funds. I am worried about kind of the runway that we have, and are we going to be able to get through the and continue as a business or not? So what do you do? Because one line of thought is, I'm going to keep these cards close to my chest, not let anyone know kind of what's going on, because the fear is, what if people leave because we're going to have funding issues? I found the exact opposite. The reality is, right, when you have this entire team, when we've talked about someone who's passionate, resourceful, they're really giving it their all. You can't then hold these cards close to your chest. There might be genuine reasons, like someone has just had a baby and they need stability in their life. You can't then go about saying, like, oh, I won't tell you what's happening with my funding. If they need to make decisions where they need less risk in their life, you know, that's the right thing for them. Like, you have to hold your values as a founder, and be honest about such things so that people can make the right choices for themselves, right? And so, what's the right balance is the big question. In terms of morale, what is truly helpful is sharing honestly what is going on. Like, I would actually tell them, look, I have all of these fundraising meetings. Here is how things are going. These conversations with VCs are going well, but I'm still not seeing them actually putting in the money. Here is what I'm doing about it. Like, here are new techniques I'm trying. Here are more introductions that I've gotten. This is kind of like you share kind of what the risks are, how you're mitigating for it, because you've already created alignment in terms of vision, strategy. People at this point believe in where you're going. They get how you're prioritizing. You're telling them honest risks. So, what is the right balance in terms of how much risk you're sharing? As a founder, you do not want to offload emotionally to your team. You're not trying to be vulnerable by sharing kind of like, this is how my meetings have gone, like they've gone well. Or like, here's some feedback, here's what I've integrated. But you're not trying to emotionally offload. Like, you're not trying to be like, oh man, those meetings went so badly. Like, I have no idea what I'm doing. Like, you're not trying to show it in such a way that like you want to share honest hope for your team. But when you need to offload, you find your personal friends to be able to do that.
But true.
I think
So
that's
you do not download your baggage to them, but yeah,
exactly.
you do not find agony aunts in them, but right, you state the facts to them that see this is what is happening. So I think transparency somewhere is very tricky. It's a very thin line that way. When you being transparent, you have to be as a founder, it lies on your shoulder very heavily what exactly you can share and what information you should withhold or whatever you are supposed to hold back, not give it all out.
There's a funny story where a guy was telling us in a workshop about psychological safety that one day the CEO in a public, in a hands-on, all hands-on deck meeting, or like their quarterly meeting or whatever, he goes like, so we have 1 million in the bank left, and and our expenses are through the roof. And the entire team is like, okay, what do I do with this information, right? Like, this is emotional offloading, because what the CEO is saying is, guys, I'm so scared. I don't know what I'm going to do. Like, but what's the team supposed to do with this? Like, there's nothing they can do, right? A better message would be, okay, so we have 1 million in the bank left. Our run rate is blah, which gives us X months of runway. And within this runway, I want to extend this runway because it's not enough. So, we're going to reduce expenses by blah. And that gives us this much extra runway. Then you tell the team, what is it I need from you? Why am I telling you all of this? Which is for fundraising. These are the key things that will help us raise funds. We need to be able to show this milestone. So sales, I need you to do this. Development, I need to be able to show this new stuff so that they can see that we've made so much progress. And I want to show this in terms of marketing, that it's going well. Now you've given your team a whole plan, right? I can get behind this. I know where we're going with this. I can see hope. It's not like, there's 1 million left us or through the roof. Guys, we need, you don't just leave the team hanging like.
So I think this is where it makes sense that what we were talking previously about the vision. The moment you give them a vision or a roadmap or a pathway that it's challenging times, but this is what I'm thinking. I'm open to if there are other things that you can talk about. There are other ways we can do this better. If you have any opinions, if you have any thoughts, if you share it across with me as a team collectively, we can move towards it. I think that's where your vision really comes into action at this point of time during those trying times.
I completely agree. And there's one other technique that I use that is really helpful, which is it's not just the vision, but like how everyday work. So as you're prioritizing, right? Like, one of the things that is really helpful is using your vision for priorities. Because now that you have this detailed vision that I described, one that describes what the problem is, who you're solving this for, why you need to solve it, etc. You have a detailed vision. So now what you need in a startup, or any company, honestly, is the balance between this long-term vision that you're trying to reach versus your short-term business needs. And in a healthy product, you want to find the right balance in this yin and yang of long-term vision versus short-term business needs. So what do you do as a founder? Like, instead of just this yin and yang that's abstract in your head, make it explicit for your team on an X and a Y axis. So your Y axis is this good for your vision or not? And your X axis is this helping us survive or not? And so things are good, things that are good for your vision and for survival, those are the easy decisions quadrant. And then, but if you're only always focused on easy decisions, you're sometimes missing out on other opportunities. The harder decisions, one is investing in the vision, which is where it's good for the long-term vision, but it's not helping you survive in the short term. So an example of that is if you have tech debt that you need to take some time to refactor code, or if you're trying to run user research to really understand, will this work in the market or not, right? That is good for the vision, but in the short term, it's taking away time. So maybe it's not helping you release a feature right now that is going to bring in revenues. So that's investing in the vision, where if you don't invest in your vision, your product gets shittier over time. Investing in the vision is where you're taking on vision debt. Vision debt is like technical debt, but on the vision side, where it's maybe great for survival. So an example of this is taking on a custom feature that'll help you win a big deal, but it's bad for the long-term vision. Like if you keep adding custom features, at some point, you catch the product disease I call obsessive sales disorder. And so what you need to do is find the right balance across all of these quadrants. And what you just said earlier about inviting thoughts from your team, but at the same time creating alignment, this sort of vision versus survival, I found really helps makes decision less contentious, because, if you and I disagree on, is this a good thing to do or not, right? Because we're passionate people, we're not just going to argue about, I think this and you think this. Like that just leads to contentious energy that you were talking about earlier. Instead, and I can tell you, look, I think we should do this. This is an easy decision. Or I feel like, we really need to take on this custom feature because we need to raise funds, earn some money, whatever it is. Like I need to build this, I need to win the sales deal. Let's take on this custom feature. When I show this to you on an X and a Y axis, and I acknowledge to you that this is vision debt, that I agree it's not good for the vision. Now it creates confidence in both of us that I care about the vision. I acknowledge that this is vision debt, but you can see that this is why I'm saying we need to take this on right now, because we need this for funding. And so this is what makes decisions less contentious. And if we disagree, we both can figure out, is it that, we're not in alignment on the vision, and that's why you don't think this is vision debt? Or is it that we're not aligned on what is survival? Like maybe you don't realize how much we need funding right now and why I'm saying we need to do this. So we can figure out where are we misaligned, as opposed to just contentious discussion, arguing, yes, do this, no, don't do that.
True, true. Having something which is visually represented, it makes your decision making much more logical, balanced, and as you said, less contentious. Because when you are as a founder, you get attached to an idea, you love that idea so much, you're obsessed over it. It's very hard to let go of it when you see you have to pivot, like we were discussing earlier also, that there are only 3 pivots that you can do, and that makes more sense, because the moment you are justifying an idea, you make the other person who has given you that idea validated, along with saying that no, right now that cannot be done, or this cannot be applied because these are the reasons. It's not just because I took a call saying that no, this can't happen. And that's a wonderful way of keeping the synergy and the energy of your team in a balance. Like every person and every element is important for your team to function. That makes such a lot of sense. Since we were talking so much about funding, in a when a bootstrapped company is trying to scale up and they're looking for funding, um, how much of these hiring decisions make sense to them, or how much of these hiring decisions, because we hear conversations from other founders that there is a lot of calls even these VCs take when you're looking to hire, be it on site or if you're looking to hire beyond your local talent pool. There is a lot of intervention. um, what has been your experience like?
When you're raising funds, VCs typically want to know that the team is all together and located here, right? And I found that a really sort of narrow minded way of thinking. Very often, even when VCs think that, oh, if you're building all this functionality, if you're building talent, it all has to be, here, located here. I find it short sighted because the assumption usually is you can't make a team work, or you can't make this a distributed team effective. I think, first of all, during the pandemic, we've shown that the remote working works. That's one. Two, distributed works well when you're able to really get everyone on board and keep this alignment using vision, strategy, this approach to prioritization that I was just describing. You know, there is work required to have that alignment, but that work is required even if you're all in one location. So the pushback I've often heard from VCs is, we don't want you to do this offshoring if you're going to get funding from us. I found that this is really unfortunate because higher has been expensive, especially if you want to get really senior people, and it may or may not work well. I think the big question or the big challenge in hiring elsewhere is, how do you find people who are, this, what I described, passionate, resourceful, and secure, and having, hiring partners who can help you find such people anywhere else than, in India, for example.
True, true, true. Because previously we had a very interesting conversations with one of the CTOs and a founder, where he was telling us about when you're hiring per se, like you said, the person with the market knowledge, be it a partner or when you're doing it yourself, somewhere your investment in terms of getting onto a call with the candidate or the person you've selected, briefing them about the roadmap or what your vision looks like, or for that matter, if you want to check the temperament of that person, because a conversation with you induces a sense of confidence as well as builds that rapport with your candidates. It makes it easier for you even to screen that person, you also as a person who is going to manage them as part of your team, gives you that, instills that confidence that, okay, this is a person I have had a conversation with, I feel this person would be somewhat like this, building a perspective around it. That familiarity helps you to build your team in a much more functional way and not just based on reports, because when you are doing it through even partners or agencies and other places, it's just resumes that you get, or you get reports. The moment you speak to somebody, you have your own set of gut feeling, you have your own set of assessment feelings or the feelers or the vibe that you get, based on which it is easier to function. um, so considering this, so what is that one piece of advice would you give somebody who is, considering starting a company on their own, they're trying to build a startup on their own? What is that one piece of crucial advice?
Um, a lot of startup founders ask me, when we start a company, like this, everything that you describe in the vision, we don't have enough information to be able to write such a vision. And so, don't you just find your vision by trying things? Like, don't you define your vision? And the one advice I would give is this is what you hear, like just, that you discover your vision along the way. But, I've started so many companies and worked on products, and that's not how it works. Like, even if it is just a stake in the ground that you want to put down, and as a founder, your best guess, based on whatever you know at this point, use that radical vision statement that I described. Like, this is the one thing that I wish I had when I started my first company. Our vision is in wireless, right? And we just didn't know what we were truly doing, like what problem we were truly solving, even though our vision sounded grand. And so the advice I would have is, even if you feel like you are missing some information, try to fill out the whole vision, fill in the blank, and use it as a stake in the ground. And when you have to pivot, instead of just switching from one idea to the next, go back to this vision statement. And if you feel the need to pivot, point for your team where on this vision were you wrong? Like, what did you learn? Your answer to this question might have actually, that's the we were targeting. Or, maybe the problem was slightly different. Articulate for your team, what were you wrong about? And what did you learn? And what are you going to do next? And so when you pivot, it's not that you cannot pivot when you have a vision. It's not that like this vision sets you on this course forever, but it helps you pivot with gravitas, where you have very clear, accurate reasons for which you're pivoting, and you're bringing your whole team with you on the journey. So that would be my one piece of advice. Like, when you're a founder, you have to create alignment and bring people with you on the journey throughout. Like, you want to create a sense, a culture of learning, that at each point, you talk about what we believe, what we just learned, and what we're therefore going to do next.
True, true, true. That's very specific. Okay. Since we're talking about lessons and how to navigate around it, in your experience, since you've been talking about so many companies that you've built, what is that one lesson that you've learned and you wish, you learned quite earlier in your startup journey? Because, like you said, people make those mistakes and you've been like, no, you should not make those. So, what is that one lesson? It's like the core lesson you've learned. It can be one or three, whichever you like, that you learned and you felt that maybe if you had learned that way earlier in your journey, it would have been much more smoother, or it would have been much more beneficial to you.
I think one of the greatest lessons was so one I've described already, which was about having the sort of clarity and bringing the team with you. The other lesson was really about, in terms of hiring, it was that, it doesn't matter where your team is, that you can have a really passionate and very distributed team working with you. The biggest thing is, are you bringing in the right people, one, and two, are you creating a culture where those people can really thrive? That was, these two things put together make your company. And when you're wrong about a hiring decision that you've made, being able to acknowledge that really quickly for yourself and then correcting for that mistake, but doing so responsibly. I feel like that, and I think that's a stressful and hard combination. But I think with each hire, being able to make each hire with responsibility and applying all of these concepts, like finding the right people, helping them thrive, and acknowledging where you're right or wrong.
That's some advice which a lot of people would benefit from. So what are your top 3 learnings as a product startup owner? When you're building a company in US, what are the 3 quintessential things that you should know when you're building your startup?
I think this is not just say this is really lessons for startup founders. One of the biggest learnings is you have to truly understand your users and what they need. So as a founder, what often happens is we often focus on something that we think like, if I had this, I would use it. And so as I call narcissist complex, it's the product disease that happens when we that are focused on what we think we need, to the point where we become disconnected from what our customers actually need. And so one of the biggest lessons is, you know, and I've done this where I built features thinking if I just had this, I would use this. And I know other founders would resonate with it. And so when you build your strategy, grounding your strategy on what is the pain that makes someone come to your product, really understanding it well enough. In my book, I give the example of Lijjat Papad, right? And when the organization was founded, I don't know if, actually, I think a lot of people don't know the story around that. It was these 7 women who founded the organization, and it all came together because they wanted to earn a dignified living. And if you looked at what are the pain points, right? Why did these women even start it? They had the work ethic, but they didn't have an education. So their job prospects were limited. And they typically were living in a patriarchy where, they had children or elders to take care of at home. So they couldn't go off and work in factories, right? And so if you look at what was the solution to those pains, understood the problem so well, the entire Lijjat model is based on women being able to work at home. Factories that they have to go to, they go pick up the dough and then they roll the papas at home. And so, this is so key, where if you didn't understand that pain point, you would build a whole model where women have to go work in factories. And if that were the model, Lijjat would have never worked. It would have never been what it is today. And it's these women are so devoted to it. They almost look at it like a temple and an institution, right? And all of this comes from Lijjat very systematically meeting their pain points. So that's a key lesson for me. Like it was a lesson where, it's in my whole experience, I've realized you don't just build features based on what you think is right, but developing this really solid understanding. And this has to come from observing users and really making sure that this is not imagining, but it's real. And secondly, doing user interviews and also running user research to figure out, do people value this pain point enough that they will actually invest something to be able to solve this pain point? So those are the key elements, I would say.
I think hearing market voice is very important somewhere. When you hear your end customers saying things which might be totally against your core product, but it's something that they need.
Yeah. And I think, in terms of best practices, what we've learned over the last couple of decades, right, is we started with this idea that we should do surveys to hear what customers think. Then we moved to focus groups. And now the best practice really is one-on-one user interviews. Like one thing that happens with, focus groups, by the way, is that if you have this in the group, it completely sways that group's opinion to something. And you don't always get how different kinds of users think. So it's super important to do one-on-one user interviews. And it's not just user interviews, it's shadowing users. And user interviews are almost like the second level. So first preference is to shadow users and observe them at their work. The second approach is to be able to do user interviews and talking to them. But one-on-one is better than even focus groups. And so, one of the things about a radical product thinking approach is when you work on a strategy that you start with real pain points, then what's the solution to those pain points? Then you think about what is the underlying engine or the capabilities that you need to be able to deliver those solutions. And then finally, logistics, meaning like, how do you deliver this solution? Like, what's your business model, sales channels, etc. So this is the radical product thinking radical strategy. And I call this radical because it's RD to help you think of real pain points. The D is for design, C is for capabilities, and the L for logistics. And thinking about it this way, helps you focus on not just technology. Like it's very tempting to just build technology and say, okay, let me find use cases for it. But instead, you're grounding it in the real pain points, like what do people need, then saying what's the solution. And then you get to capabilities, meaning what is the underlying engine or the technical solution to be able to deliver the design. And then finally, you also think about pricing models, sales channels, etc. You don't just sort of forget about it. Like very often as a startup founder, you hear, just build it, first you'll think about the business model. And you can't just build a house without thinking about who you're building it for and of what your pricing model is for that house. Yeah.
I see. I see. Yeah, viability somewhere is very important for you to survive as a startup. Otherwise, it is just a fancy idea and building sandcastles, as because if you do not have a direction to go, you are bound to fail. That was some wonderful insights, Radhika. It was wonderful talking to you. We hope that this information that we are sharing, this information that we are talking about, it helps these startup owners or these bootstrap companies do better. Because without these help or these insights, a lot of people do those mistakes which we are trying to avoid or you steer by.
Thank you so much for having being here, and thank you for your question.